Anyway, welcome everyone to the State Department. I do want to begin talking about Syria for a few minutes. First, the United States is deeply concerned about the continued arbitrary detention and harassment of peaceful activists by the Syrian regime. Last week, Alawite activist Mazen Darwish and at least 12 others were arrested when security forces raided the office of the Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression, an organization that recently obtained special consultative status with the United Nations. This came one day after Zina Shala, who is a Christian youth leader, was arrested in Damascus for providing aid to vulnerable communities. And today we're also clearly deeply troubled and saddened by reports that American journalist Marie Colvin and French journalist Remy Ochlik were killed today in Homs as a result of the intense shelling, the ongoing intense shelling by the Syrian regime. We are still working with the Poles and others to confirm the deaths, but this follows yesterday's sad news that Rami Sayed, who was a brave young Syrian who filmed videos of Syrian security forces' repressive acts, was killed also in the shelling of Homs. We, of course, extend our deepest condolences to their families and loved ones, and just to note that their sacrifice in chronicling the daily suffering of the people of Homs stands as a testament to journalism's highest standards. That'll take your questions.
Go ahead.
Does this add any additional urgency to Friday's meeting in Tunisia?
It's hard to add any more urgency to Friday's meeting. We've all watched, I think, with some degree of horror as we've witnessed the onslaught on Homs. It brings it home in a new way, I would say, that we need to, the international community needs to do more to help the Syrian people. But again, we're talking about measures that the international community is going to try and take when they meet in Tunis, these friends of Syria. But let's, squarely put blame back on Assad and his regime, who bear responsibility for these deaths and the deaths of thousands of innocent civilians.
Not that it should be the death of a Western journalist or the death of any journalist to add urgency to the situation, but given the daily carnage that we are seeing, that we are hearing about, that we're reading about, Marie Colvin gave testament to it just 24 hours ago on the BBC, saying she watched a 2-year-old die, and was sharing that knowledge with the world. Does this add any urgency to the idea that the international community needs to find a way to get past its own parochial concerns, some would argue, and do something in the way of an intervention? How much longer does this go on?
Well, let's be very clear that the vast majority of the international community, as we saw with the UN General Assembly vote last week, stands squarely on the side of the Syrian people. The failure to get a UN Security Council resolution, blame for that rests on 2 countries. So the international community is fairly united in trying to help the people of Syria. The question is, what do? We talked about humanitarian assistance and trying to work those avenues, ceasefires. We need to get the Syrian regime to stop the onslaught of Homs. I mean, these are immediate goals and immediate objectives, I think, as we head into Tunis.
Does this mean, given the attempts and the failures to get some sort of UN imprimatur on some sort of action, that some other framework needs to be looked at and not just the imprimatur of a UNSC resolution in order to act? I mean, and let me put it more simply. Why does there need to be a UN Security Council resolution in order for the world to take some sort of action? Why can't it be done under an Arab League auspices or under a NATO auspices, even though the Secretary General earlier this week ruled out any sort of military intervention?
Well, it's a fair question, and I think that it speaks to why we're going to Tunis, because we tried and we failed within the UN Security Council. And as Ambassador Rice and others have said, it was a huge failure of that organization, of that body, to live up to its responsibilities. But we're trying now through this Friends of Syria group to build pressure on Assad to look for new ways to add to pressure, but also, as I said, try to take immediate steps, whatever we can do to ease the suffering of the people of Homs through humanitarian assistance and a possible ceasefire. But I think that, as we look at this, we have huge regional support against Assad and against what he's doing, and and we do have significant international support. The EU, the United States, others stand with the Syrian people as we move forward. So I do think that, and it speaks to why we're doing this meeting in Tunis, that there is broad agreement that we need to act. Yeah, go ahead.
UN announced today that their humanitarian chief, Valerie Amos, is going to go to Syria in the near future in an attempt to negotiate some sort of access for humanitarian aid workers. Did you guys support this plan? Do you think there's any hope of success here? Because that seems to be a track that's moving separate to the Tunis meeting.
It is. Frankly, Andy, I think at this point, we would support any effort, I think, to stop the shelling and to stop the onslaught. The devil's in the details on all of these things, and in fact, you can never trust the Syrian regime because they've promised so much in the past and failed to deliver. But any effort we think by the UN to end the violence is worthwhile.
This move to send Amos seems to come or follow along from a Russian suggestion that the Assad regime might be persuaded to allow access in some way or fashion. Do you have any sense that the Russians are increasing their pressure on the Syrians to do something like this?
I mean, it's hard to say. We've seen the same press reports. Obviously, we're hopeful that the Russians are delivering the sternest possible message to Assad and his regime, and are at least using that leverage, the leverage that they have to make him aware that the international community is increasingly speaking with one voice against what he's doing. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Today was also reported a high-level Syrian defector said that Russians are continuing to send arms and ammunition as recently as January to the Syrian military. Is that your understanding as well, and what's your reaction to that?
Well, we've spoken out. I can't speak to the latest delivery of arms or on a date certain than when it was delivered. But we've said many times that these arms shipments continue and that they're reprehensible.
Do you believe they continue to this day and include things that could be used against the protesters?
Honestly, I don't know, Josh. But we've been very vocal in saying that they need to end because given what's happening to the Syrian populations, innocent civilians, how anyone can supply the regime with arms is beyond us. Yeah, go ahead in the back.
What kind of immediate steps does the United States expect from the Tunis meeting?
Well, again, I don't want to, I don't want to preview the meeting because there's a lot of hard work and discussion that needs to be done in Tunis. We've talked before about, again, I think I put it in kind of two stages. We have these immediate steps. We've got this ongoing violence, shelling of homes and elsewhere that we need to take immediate steps to address. We need to try to get humanitarian assistance into these people. And then longer term, how do we aim for a democratic transition along the lines of the Arab League plan? Yeah, go ahead.
What's the reaction to the conversation the King of Saudi Arabia had with the President of Russia, Medvedev, today?
Again, I'm going off press reports. I would really refer you to the Saudis to read out their king's phone call with President Medvedev. But Saudi Arabia, as part of the Arab League, is outraged by what it sees happening in Syria, and I think rightly so.
Saw something that Russia and China both came out in support of the Assad regime again. How does the international community move forward at this point on Syria when you have these two big players who are not falling in line, who are taking a different stance?
Well, it's a good question and one we've been trying to answer for the last couple of weeks ever since the UN Security Council vote. But I think we're working as much as we can around them. We do have, as I said, all of Syria's neighbors, with one exception, standing up against Assad and seeking to support the Syrian opposition and support the Syrian people. So, there is, it's tempting to focus on these two countries or three countries, but, it's also useful to note that there is overwhelming pressure on Assad, and that pressure is just continuing to grow.
You said there's one neighbor that's
No,
not
Iran.
supporting? The-
Iran is not, I mean,
Okay.
Russia, China, and Iran, essentially, if you
Because
want to draw it out of it.
I don't know how Israel right now is supporting the Syrian opposition, unless you know more than me, or even Iraq.
Well, again, but these are countries that have clearly are on the side of democratic transition in Syria.
Different topic?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Iran. There were the IEA. There was a group from the IEA that went to Iran. It doesn't seem like there was much progress there. What's your readout? What's your assessment of the trip and how that affects diplomacy going forward?
Well, I think we regret that the visit was, as Director General termed it. God bless you. Sorry, termed it as disappointing. It's not particularly surprising, but the fact that that they didn't come, that Iran didn't allow them to visit certain facilities. None of this is surprising. We've seen this before, frankly. I would just say that there is a more detailed report expected in the coming days. So, we're going to withhold further judgment until we see that report. But, we share his disappointment.
Would you hope that the Iranians would allow access to the sites?
I'm sorry.
Would you hope that the Iranians would allow access?
Well, of
to
course.
the
I
sites?
mean, we want to see them cooperate. We want to see them, address the international community's very well-founded concerns about their nuclear program, and that remains our goal. And that remains our goal via the IAEA, but also, working within the P5+1.
How do you take this action and juxtapose it with the letter that was recently sent, which seemed to imply a willingness to talk about its nuclear program in the frame of negotiations, and now you have an unwillingness to even allow monitors that they are obliged to allow in to see these sites?
Brad, it's really difficult to say. It is one of the reasons why, we're taking time to consult and move in a coordinated and deliberative way forward with our P5+1 partners, and not jumping to any quick decisions. We want to see a return to the negotiating table to talk about the real issue here, its nuclear program, and we're going to continue weighing, the IAEA visit, but also other factors as we move forward.
When you put these two together, does it suggest to you an Iranian regime that is not yet sure which way it wants to go?
It's hard to say. We think it possibly suggests, an Iranian regime that's feeling the squeeze of sanctions and, are both trying to shore up domestic support, but also, again, feeling the weight of these sanctions that the international community's put on them. And, that two-track approach that we've often talked about is going to remain in place. We want to see negotiations move forward. There is that diplomatic track, but we're not going to ease up on the sanctions.
But just lastly,
Yeah, sure.
does
Go ahead.
this action undermine the goodwill, the stated goodwill in the letter? Does this almost immediately disprove that there is any possibility of change from this regime?
Well, again, I'll just say, I'll go back to what I originally said, which is, it is disappointing, but, we're going to assess with our partners in P5+1 partners as we move forward. And I think it, again, just speaks to the need to move in a very cautious but coherent and deliberative fashion. Yeah, go ahead.
Is Iran's cooperation with the IEA a precondition for the resumption of the negotiations?
Again, I think there's a couple of avenues here. We certainly, P5+1 works closely with the IAEA. What we're looking for when Iran gets back to the negotiating table is for a serious discussion of its nuclear program and looking for it to address our concerns about it, and not, that's first and foremost. Yeah, go ahead, Indy.
Sort of a similar question, but
Yeah.
it just sounds as though you're trying to sort of differentiate between the IAEA interactions with Iran, the P5+1, which obviously they're different groups. But does this really not have much bearing on the P5+1 decision-making process about resuming talks with them? It sounds as though you're sort of discounting this.
Now, look, I mean, we work obviously very closely with the IAEA in addressing concerns about Iran